Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something quite significant. The transactional collapse. This idea of a systematic shift, moving away from a society built on trust towards one that's purely transactional.
Exactly. And the core idea, the thesis we're exploring from these sources, is pretty stark. It argues that democracy really runs on this invisible habit trust.
Right.
And the moment we started swapping that trust out for pure transaction, well, the same kind of thinking that broke our monetary system started breaking marriages, markets, even our sense of meaning.
So our mission today is to trace that back, to find the systemic roots, starting with a really key moment, 1971. So why 1971? What happened then? What was the big policy shift?
Well, that takes us to the Nixon Shock. August 15th, 1971. That's when the U.S. essentially said, okay, dollars are no longer convertible to gold. It blew up the Bretton Woods system.
The consequence of that.
Profound. It basically removed the anchor, the external, non-negotiable check on government spending and fiscal policy. It was really the moment, as one source puts it, that stewardship was swapped for strategy. It gave the green light, the regulatory freedom needed for this massive expansion of debt and credit later on.
Okay, so the government side opens the door to, well, almost infinite credit. But how does that translate down? How did it change the way corporations, and maybe even we, see our roles? This is where the sources talk about citizenship quietly turning into consumption.
Yeah, exactly. Once those old constraints were gone, the whole game shifted towards, let's say, financial optimization. We hear a lot about the neoliberal policies that came next, deregulation, tax cuts. The promise was always trickle down.
Right, that wealth would flow downwards.
But the data, the actual empirical research our sources point to is pretty clear. Cutting taxes for the wealthy. It consistently makes inequality worse. It doesn't really spur the broad economic growth promised. It's more like trickle-up.
So, if tax cuts didn't deliver growth for everyone, corporations needed another way to, well, extract value. This brings us to Shareholder Value Orientation, SVO. What is that functionally? How does it push this transactional model?
SVO basically became the engine. It dictates that the main job, the only job really, is maximizing the short-term share price. So resources get funneled into things that boost that immediately, like dividends, stock buybacks, instead of, say, long-term investment, R&D, infrastructure, worker training. That stuff takes a back seat.
So success gets disconnected from actually building things or innovating long-term.
Completely. It becomes an institutional commitment to thinking only about the next quarter, the next share price bump. Purely transactional.
That kind of system, it sounds like it would create a very specific mindset among those at the top. One source uses a really strong term, paranoid sociopathy. What's meant by that? Sounds quite extreme.
Yeah, it's a loaded term for sure. But it's not a clinical diagnosis. It's describing what becomes an institutionally rewarded strategy. A mindset that sees everything as zero-sum. You have to hoard, you have to hedge, you have to extract, because if you don't, someone else will.
It's not about building collective value then.
No, it's about competitive survival calculation within that transactional framework. Protect your own position.
And if that's the mindset, complete detachment. Is there like physical proof? What does that look like?
Well, the most striking example might be the rise of these luxury billionaire bunkers.
Oh, right. Heard about those.
They're literal escape pods. Lifeboats, as one source vividly put it, built with the wood taken from the ship being society.
Wow.
It's the ultimate hedge against the very collapse their actions might be accelerating. It assumes the social contract is already broken.
And the real world cost isn't just hypothetical bunkers, it's actual civic failure, isn't it? We saw that starkly during the pandemic.
Absolutely. This connects directly. Social trust isn't just some fuzzy feeling. It's a hard, measurable, strategic national asset. Look at the U.S. COVID response. Deep polarization. Very low social cooperation. The result. Compared to high-trust South Korea, the U.S. had, population adjusted, something like 23 times more deaths.
23 times.
That stark difference shows you, right there, the real-world consequence of a fractured, low-trust, transactional society.
So if the root is this deep systemic and, you could say, moral issue, where do we even start with a fix? Policy tweaks alone seem insufficient.
That's the core insight, isn't it? The fix isn't just policy. It requires what you might call moral engineering, a shift in the underlying values. We need to push corporate governance away from SVO towards models based on patient capital and stewardship.
Patient capital, meaning
prioritizing value creation over longer horizons, decades, not quarters.
Right.
Incentivizing investment in people and R&D, not just the quick transactional win of a higher stock price next week.
And for workers caught in this, especially in the gig economy, where work is purely transactional.
Yeah, that precarity needs addressing. We need to reintroduce some institutional security, things like portable benefits.
So benefits that follow the worker, not tied to one specific employer.
Exactly. It mitigates that constant instability that's become so common. It pushes back against the purely transactional view of labor.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the fundamental danger we're highlighting here is this collapse of civic capacity. The inability of a society that's polarized, that's transactional, to actually come together and cooperate effectively, especially when facing big crises.
Yes. And this isn't entirely unprecedented. It brings up a really chilling parallel if you look back at history, specifically the late Roman Republic.
How so?
That society also depended heavily on unwritten rules and civic duty, especially among the elite. But when loyalty shifted away from the republic, the civic ideal, towards individual generals, towards power, the whole thing crumbled. You could argue Rome ultimately died from a kind of emotional collapse, a population just too fragmented, too exhausted, too cynical to defend its own ideals because trust in the institutions was gone. And that, for you listening, might be the core lesson we need to grapple with today.